Some women will destroy your life with a smile. You'll think she's your future, but she's the very reason you lose your focus, your purpose, and eventually yourself. She'll hug you while draining your self-worth. She'll kiss you while rewriting your story to suit her lies. You won't see it coming until it's too late. You think you're building a future. She's gathering resources. You think you're falling in love. She's studying your weaknesses. You think she's special. She sees you as replaceable, and when she's done with you, she won't just walk away. She'll leave you confused, doubting yourself, and calling it love. So if you've ever been confused, lost your ambition, or felt empty in a relationship, comment never again. This video will save your future. Number 1. Makes everything about her. She makes every single thing about herself in ways that are so subtle at first. You don't even notice what's happening. You just think she's expressive. You think she's passionate. Maybe you even admire how much she talks about her life, her struggles, her goals, her feelings. But it starts creeping in slowly, like a fog you don't see until you're already breathing it in daily. And by the time you realize what's happening, you've disappeared from your own life. You're barely there in your own mind. And it's always her thoughts, her needs, her complaints that come first, because she turns every conversation into a monologue about what she's going through. And every story you try to share is met with a bigger story about what happened to her. And at first you think she's just trying to relate, but you start noticing that when you talk about your progress, she gets distant or suddenly tired. When you talk about your struggles, she finds a way to center her own pain again. And the worst part is when you confront her about it, she either plays confused or acts offended, saying things like, "Why are you making me feel bad for expressing myself?" And suddenly, you're the one apologizing for wanting a moment to breathe in your own life. And now you're minimizing your wins, your losses, your growth, just so she can stay comfortable being the center of the emotional stage. And here's the brutal truth. If you're not the lead in your own life, you're not living, you're surviving someone else's movie where you only get screen time if it serves their plot. And the longer you stay in it, the more you lose track of your own journey. Your direction fades, your goals become blurred, and it's not because you're weak. It's because you're being emotionally consumed by someone who has no room for another person in their world, unless they orbit them perfectly and silently. And this doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It means you wake up to the realization that your time, your mental space, your emotional bandwidth are sacred. They are limited resources that should never be drained by someone who cannot hold space for your existence. So what do you do now? You start by becoming present to how often you suppress your opinions, how often you edit your feelings before you speak, how many days go by where your voice doesn't even get used for you, and then you start shifting the balance by reclaiming space. Small moments at first, like setting a clear end to a conversation or refusing to be emotionally hijacked every time she's uncomfortable. And when she protests, because she will, because emotional monopolists don't like losing control, you remain firm, not aggressive, not loud, just unmoved, because you understand that protecting your identity isn't selfish, it's survival. And you don't need validation for wanting to be seen, for wanting to be valued as more than just a backdrop to someone else's never-ending emotional broadcast. And you will be tested here. Your patience, your boundaries, your sense of self will be questioned, especially by those who benefited from your silence. But you stay grounded in this one truth. Your life is not meant to revolve around any one person unless they also revolve around you in equal measure. And you will feel guilt when you first take your space back. That's normal. You've been conditioned to feel guilty for existing outside of someone else's needs. But guilt is not always a sign that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's the price of finally doing something right. And if you're hearing this, and it feels like I'm talking directly to your experience, It's because too many live their entire lives in relationships that are entirely one-sided, where their dreams are silenced, their energy drained, their confidence eroded, and they keep telling themselves it's just a rough patch, or she's just emotional, or she'll change. But the truth is, people rarely change when they have no reason to. And if you keep rewarding this behavior with attention, with comfort, with constant presence, you are reinforcing a reality where you do not matter, and eventually you will break. Not because of her, but because of all the pieces of yourself you gave away quietly while calling it love. And the only way to reverse this is to stop waiting for her to care and start proving to yourself that your story deserves space, your words deserve air, your dreams deserve protection, and your soul deserves freedom. And if you don't believe that yet, that's okay. Belief is built through action, not emotion. So write again, speak again, decide again, take up space again, and if she cannot respect the rise of your voice, she was never meant to be close to it in the first place. And that's not bitterness, it's clarity, because love, without mutual expression, is servitude, and you were not born to serve someone else's ego. You were born to live your full truth, and that starts the moment you decide to stop disappearing in someone else's life and start reappearing in your own. And you were never created to be someone's emotional accessory, shrinking yourself for their spotlight, but to become someone who leads themselves with clarity, peace, and unwavering truth. And if you're ready to build that version of yourself, the version that never fades in someone else's story again, then the Stoic Relationship Blueprint is your next step, because this isn't just another book. It's the exact guide you were never taught but always needed, built on timeless Stoic principles that will show you how to reclaim your voice, protect your peace, and master your emotional world in relationships and in life. And now it's available in audiobook form so you can listen while walking, training, or just reclaiming your time. And the best part, once you get it, it's yours forever. Unlimited access, no expiration, just pure life-changing wisdom you can return to whenever you start forgetting who you are. So, if you've ever asked yourself, why do I keep losing myself in love? Or, how do I stop this cycle for good? You already know the answer is waiting for you in the comments, one click away, and this time, it's not for her, it's for you. Number 2, never satisfied, always complaining. She turns every win into a problem, every effort into a disappointment, and every moment of peace into a stage for dissatisfaction, and you notice it not immediately, but slowly, like a whisper that grows louder with every passing week. You take her out, but the service wasn't good enough. You help her solve a problem, but you didn't do it exactly how she wanted. You surprise her with something thoughtful, but she picks out the one thing you got wrong, and over time you begin to feel like everything you do will be used against you, like your presence is a test you can't ever pass. And here's the truth. It's not about your effort, it's about her hunger for control, because some people don't want happiness. They want to maintain emotional leverage, and the way they do that is through endless dissatisfaction, and the more you try to please her, the more she withdraws approval just to keep you chasing. And that's what this is. A psychological game where the rules change every day and your value is based on how hard you're willing to work for nothing. And the danger here is subtle because you think you're improving the relationship by working harder, adjusting more, giving in just to keep her calm. But all you're doing is teaching her that the more she complains, the more you'll sacrifice. And that creates a pattern where she doesn't need to grow, doesn't need to self-reflect, doesn't need to meet you halfway, because you've shown her that her bare minimum gets your everything. And eventually you start walking on edge around her emotions, watching what you say, overthinking your next move, wondering why you're always the problem, even when you're the only one trying. And this eats away at your confidence, at your clarity, because you're stuck in a loop of fixing what she breaks, apologizing for what she invents, and trying to hold up a relationship that feels more like a job you're terrified of losing. And here's where the shift begins. You realize that peace is not something you need to earn from anyone. Peace is your default, and anything or anyone that pulls you out of it on a daily basis is not a connection. It's a trap, and from that realization comes the practice of presence. You start observing not just what she says, but how she makes you feel after she says it, and you stop reacting, you stop trying to explain your intent every time she spins a narrative around your actions, and instead you watch patterns. How she responds when things go right, how she acts when you're joyful, whether she ever gives you credit without a complaint attached. And when you start noticing that no matter how high you jump, the goalpost keeps moving, you stop jumping and start walking, not out of anger, but out of awareness, because you've finally seen through the illusion that love is struggle, that sacrifice is proof, that peace must be earned, and now you choose silence not as submission, but as discipline. You choose space not as escape, but as clarity. And you begin taking inventory of how often you've had to shrink yourself just to maintain her emotional comfort. And it stings because you'll remember how much you wanted to make it work, how hard you tried. But you'll also start to feel the strength that comes from finally saying, enough. And once you say that, internally and without apology, you unlock a level of self-respect that no relationship can give you and no manipulator can take from you, and your new path becomes centered on simplicity. You give where you're appreciated, not where you're tolerated. You speak only when it adds value, not just to defend your goodness to someone committed to misunderstanding you. And you reclaim your energy from arguments that go in circles, from validation that's held hostage, from a woman who sees your love as her leverage, and you no longer need to be right. You need to be free. And freedom looks like knowing your efforts are not meant for bottomless pits, that your compassion is not a currency to buy someone's mood, that your kindness should never be weaponized against you. And as you practice this detachment, you start rebuilding a life where your worth is not up for debate every time someone wakes up in a mood, and you create standards. Real ones, not just quotes you post, but rules you live by. If she cannot recognize effort without twisting it, she cannot receive your energy. If she treats your wins like background noise, she does not deserve to witness your future. And if your joy has to be earned in pieces through her approval, then you are not loved. You are managed, and you were never created to be someone's emotional employee, clocking in and out of their moods just to avoid another complaint. So now you walk away. Not because you hate her, but because you finally love yourself enough to. Choose peace without conditions, and when you do that, your entire life changes because you stop negotiating with chaos, you stop buying your place in someone's life, and you start standing so firm in your worth that the only women who enter your world from this point forward are the ones who see your value and treat your effort not as expected, but as a gift. Number 3, obsessed with status and money. She doesn't see you. She sees the lifestyle you offer, the access, the influence, the surface-level value that she can show off. And the way she attaches herself to your achievements feels flattering at first, because it looks like admiration. It looks like she's impressed by your drive, your accomplishments, your discipline. But as time passes, you start to notice that she's not proud of who you are. She's proud of what you have, and the moment that status is at risk, she pulls away, becomes cold, suddenly emotionally distant, and the praise turns into pressure, the attention into expectation, because for her, love was never about connection, it was about transaction. And in this setup, you're not a partner, you're a provider, and your value is conditional, temporary, based entirely on your ability to maintain the image that attracted her in the first place. And here's where most don't realize they're being used, because it's not always aggressive or obvious. Sometimes it's soft, subtle, wrapped in compliments and support. But it's fake support designed to secure her comfort, and you realize it when the applause stops the moment you fail, when she becomes passive-aggressive when you have a setback, when she distances herself when you're emotionally vulnerable or financially challenged. And instead of helping you rebuild, she quietly withdraws. Or worse, she criticizes you for not being the version of yourself that she benefits from the most. And this isn't just cold, it's calculated, and it's painful because you begin to question whether the love was ever real, whether she ever actually cared. And the truth is that some people don't fall in love with you. They fall in love with your results. And the moment those results slow down, their loyalty disappears. And now you're stuck trying to perform, trying to maintain appearances, pushing yourself not out of purpose, but out of fear that if you slow down, she'll leave. And that's a prison disguised as a partnership. And the most dangerous part of it is that it feels normal when you're in it. Because in a world that celebrates image, that equates success with worth, it's easy to mistake ambition for affection, admiration for love. But here's how you find the truth. You take away the extras, strip down the lifestyle, the luxuries, the access, and see what's left. Take her into silence, into stillness, into ordinary places, and observe how she behaves when there's no spotlight to stand in, no crowd to impress, no envy to spark in others. And what you'll find in those moments will tell you everything you need to know, because if her warmth disappears when the cameras turn off, if her interest fades when you're not achieving, then understand you're dealing with someone who was never invested in the real you, and the solution isn't to convince her to stay. It's to detach from the idea that someone who loved your success but not your struggle is worth keeping, and you begin practicing the art of quiet ambition, building not to impress but to align with your values, and letting people reveal their intentions, not through what they say in your high moments, but how they behave in your lowest. And you no longer explain yourself to those who only listen when they benefit. You no longer overextend trying to maintain a lifestyle that keeps her around, because you realize that if peace costs money, if connection needs validation, it's not love, it's dependency. And you weren't born to be someone's upgrade package. You weren't put here to serve as a stepping stone in someone else's climb. You are meant to be fully seen, fully heard, even when life isn't glamorous, even when success is slow. And the moment you release the need to impress her is the moment you reclaim your power. And when you do that, you start building a life that attracts people who love you in simplicity, who stay even when there's nothing to gain, who listen when you have nothing to offer but presence. And that's where real power lives, not in what you own, but in who stands beside you when the lights go out. And from that point forward, you stop auditioning for conditional affection and start living with the confidence that your value is rooted not in your results, but in your essence. Number 4. Always playing the victim. When every conflict ends with guilt pointed at you, when no situation is ever her fault, and every resolution makes you smaller, it's not a relationship, it's emotional captivity, and the pattern reveals itself through repetition, where arguments begin with a problem and always end with your apology, even when you did nothing but set a boundary, speak truthfully, or simply express a feeling, and the way it plays out is predictable. She raises her voice or lowers it into silence, turns her pain into performance, and casts herself in a role that makes you the villain, no matter how respectful or clear you were, because it's not about fairness, it's about control. And the weapon she uses isn't rage or logic, but victimhood. Because in this dynamic, the person who can claim the most pain holds the most power, and she's mastered that art so deeply that you begin second-guessing your memory, your intentions, even your values, and soon you start filtering every decision through the lens of how it might be twisted, misread, or used against you. And that's when the shift happens, not in her, but in you. Because now you're cautious where you used to be clear, hesitant where you used to be firm, walking on verbal eggshells in your own life just to avoid the next accusation, the next meltdown, the next session where you're expected to soothe a wound she created and handed to you to fix. And this is where the cost becomes unbearable, because your peace dies in increments. Your confidence erodes quietly, and the saddest part is you begin to believe that love means proving you're not a monster, and that's the trap. She keeps you apologizing so you never have time to reflect, keeps you repairing things that were never broken by you, and every time you try to reclaim yourself, she finds a way to spin your strength into cruelty, your clarity into aggression, and suddenly the one thing you were holding on to, your integrity, feels like something you have to justify. And here's the truth that sets you free. Real love doesn't punish honesty. It doesn't punish imperfection. And it doesn't turn every disagreement into a trial where you are always found guilty by someone who refuses to examine themselves. So what you do is begin reclaiming your right to be misunderstood, to walk away without defending what you never did, to honor your intentions even when they're ignored, and you do that not with anger, but with stillness, not with begging, but with departure. And you build that stillness daily by writing down what happened without her edits, reflecting on moments where your words were twisted, where your kindness was flipped into blame, and slowly you begin separating fact from fiction, truth from trauma. And once you see clearly, you stop negotiating with the version of her that only exists when she's hurting, and you start protecting the version of you that only exists when you're free. And you realize that anyone who always needs to be the victim is someone who cannot carry the weight of real connection, because connection requires accountability, requires vulnerability that's not weaponized but honored. And until that exists, no amount of explaining, softening, or proving will ever change the cycle. And the healing begins when you stop making room for people who survive by shrinking you, because emotional parasites don't leave when they're full. They leave when there's nothing left to take, and that's not a statement of bitterness. It's a recognition that you are not a healer for someone who refuses to recognize the damage they cause, and you are not a refuge for someone who turns every honest conversation into a spotlight on their pain just to avoid responsibility. So from this point on, your peace becomes non-negotiable, your truth becomes untouchable, and your exit becomes necessary, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to stop playing a role in a script you didn't write. And as you walk, you'll feel guilt, of course, because that's what manipulation leaves behind. But guilt isn't proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's residue from survival, and your job now is to clear that residue, to rebuild a life where your love doesn't come with disclaimers, where your voice doesn't come with fear, and where your future is not shaped by how well you can absorb blame, but by how bravely you can reclaim your power. And that's what this is now. A reclamation, not of control, but of clarity, not of dominance, but of direction. And you walk it quietly, not to punish her, but to rescue yourself, because no one else will do it for you, and no apology you give will ever satisfy someone who's addicted to feeling wronged. So now you give yourself the permission she never would, the permission to breathe without permission, to live without. Walking on eggshells, to love without constantly proving you're not a threat. And that is how you begin again, not as someone trying to be understood by the one who never listens, but as someone who no longer needs to be understood by anyone who benefits from your confusion. Number 5. Thinks she's smarter than you. Every conversation becomes a competition, every correction a subtle dig, and your ideas are met not with curiosity, but condescension, until you begin questioning your own mind, and what starts as seemingly playful disagreement turns into a pattern where everything you say is either corrected, challenged, or minimized, and over time you lose the rhythm of confidence. You hesitate before speaking. Not because you lack clarity, but because you're bracing for yet another interruption, another unnecessary debate disguised as dialogue. And this isn't intelligence. It's dominance through erosion, where her goal isn't to understand but to outshine. And it sounds like casual sarcasm at first. Little jokes about how you got it wrong, how she already knew that, how you're so cute when you try to explain things. But behind the tone is a pattern of disrespect, one where every interaction leaves you feeling slightly smaller than before, and the reality is that you're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological chess match where every move you make is critiqued instead of supported, where her intellect isn't used to build with you, but to rank above you. And this creates a dynamic where your voice slowly retreats. Your thoughts stay in your head, and your vision becomes something you pursue in silence. And the danger here isn't loud, it's quiet, because there are no fights, just endless debates, no aggression, just constant correction, and you begin confusing intelligence with insight, forgetting that wisdom listens while ego lectures, and the longer you endure this, the more you shrink. The more you adapt to her superiority complex by pretending you don't mind being treated like a student instead of a partner. But deep down, it weighs on you because you know you're not being heard, not being seen, only tolerated until you say something she disagrees with, and then you're made to feel like you should have stayed silent, and the healing begins when you stop mistaking her cleverness for care. When you recognize that someone who constantly needs to assert how right they are does not seek connection, they seek control, and from that point, you begin rebuilding your voice, not by matching her arrogance, but by reconnecting with the power of your own insight. And you start reclaiming your words, refusing to engage in unnecessary arguments that go nowhere, and instead of reacting, you observe, you listen to the tone beneath her words, and you ask yourself, does this woman want to understand me or win over me? And if the answer keeps coming back to power, to competition, to ego, then you know what to do. You create distance, not out of weakness, but from wisdom, because being right all the time is not a badge of honor when it comes at the cost of respect. And you were never meant to walk beside someone who sees your perspective as something to be corrected rather than considered. And as you detach, you begin speaking again, first to yourself, then to people who actually listen, and you notice how different it feels to be in rooms where you don't have to defend every sentence, where your ideas are met with interest rather than instant rebuttal, and that becomes your new standard, one where peace is found not in always being right, but in being respected enough to be wrong without ridicule. And you take this even further by mastering your own thoughts, sharpening your awareness, practicing presence so deeply that no one can bait you into defensiveness, because your identity is no longer tied to proving yourself right. It's anchored in expressing truth calmly and walking away from those who can't handle it unless it matches their script. And the day you stop debating your worth with someone who feels bigger by making you feel smaller is the day you unlock the clarity to choose relationships that honor intellect without using it as a weapon, because a mind that needs to prove itself constantly is a mind that hasn't yet found peace, and you are done being the canvas for someone else's emotional projection. So now you set the new rule. Any relationship that requires you to dilute your voice, soften your vision, or question your intuition in order to keep the peace is not worth preserving. And if she cannot meet you with equal respect, if she cannot sit in disagreement without diminishing you, then she is not your partner, she is your competitor. And no man thrives in the presence of silent psychological combat, where love is replaced with lectures, where support is conditional on submission, and where value is measured by how much you agree instead of how deeply you connect. And so now you let go, not just of her, but of the need to be understood by someone who only listens to correct, and you walk into the next season of your life with one goal: to be heard fully, without fear, without interruption, and with the understanding that intelligence is never loud, it's humble, and love doesn't talk over you, it walks beside you. Number 6, has no respect. Disrespect doesn't always arrive as screaming or chaos. Sometimes it comes in eye rolls, sarcasm, ignoring your boundaries, or speaking to you like your voice holds no weight, and you start to feel it not all at once, but piece by piece, in those small moments when you speak and her response is a sigh, when you try to share a thought and she checks her phone, when you plan something thoughtful and she tears it down with one look or a dismissive tone. And over time, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore because your dignity is dying slowly in a space where you are tolerated but not valued, present but not respected. And what makes it worse is how the world sees her. Charming, composed, maybe even sweet in public, but behind closed doors, you are invisible unless you're being useful, and any attempt to assert yourself is met with condescension, like your boundaries are optional, like your needs are a nuisance, and this becomes your normal if you let it. This low-grade erosion of self, where you stop speaking up not because you don't care, but because you're tired of defending your right to be heard. And the truth is that no relationship survives the absence of respect, because love cannot grow in a space where you're emotionally stepped over every time you try to stand up for yourself, and you begin to notice how quiet you've become, how unsure your tone has gotten, how much you hesitate before expressing even the most basic truth. And that's not connection, that's emotional submission. And the deeper truth is that people don't just lose their voice, they give it away, one ignored comment at a time. And now you're waking up to the reality that the longer you stay, the more pieces of yourself you trade in just to keep the peace. But peace built on disrespect is not peace. It's a cage wrapped in polite behavior. And what you must understand is that respect is not something you demand loudly. It's something you model and then protect relentlessly. And that means noticing every time your boundaries are pushed, every time your effort is mocked, every time your vulnerability is used as leverage. And instead of arguing, you observe. Instead of begging, you detach. Because once you realize someone doesn't value your voice, the only response is to stop offering it, not as a punishment, but as a discipline. And this is where Stoic clarity becomes your shield. You stop trying to control her reaction and start mastering your own. You stop proving your worth and start living in it. And that shift turns the tables in ways that silence never could. Because the moment you prioritize your own peace over her approval, everything changes. The dynamic resets. And if she continues to disrespect you, now you're not confused. You're informed. And that knowledge gives you the power to walk away with your integrity intact. And yes, it will hurt, because letting go of someone you gave everything to feels like failure. But staying in a place where you're slowly becoming a shell of yourself is the real loss. And now you choose differently. Now you choose yourself, and you rebuild piece by piece, starting with your standards. Because the first standard is this: no one who makes you feel small deserves a seat at your table, no matter how beautiful they are, no matter how long the history, because history means nothing if the present is filled with disrespect. And moving forward, you stop explaining your principles to people who benefit from violating them. You stop negotiating with those who gain power through your silence, and you adopt a new posture. Not defensive, not loud, just immovable. Because when you respect yourself deeply, you no longer fear being alone. You fear being reduced. And in that state of mind, you begin to attract people who speak to you like your words matter, who listen without interrupting, who honor your space as sacred instead of invading it when it's convenient. And this isn't idealism, it's real, but only for those who refuse to settle for emotional crumbs. And if this sounds like you, then this is your wake-up call, because you don't need permission to demand respect. You just need the strength to leave when it's not given. And that strength doesn't come from anger. It comes from understanding your value so well that anything less becomes obvious. And from this moment on, you no longer tolerate sarcasm disguised as humor, guilt trips packaged as concern, or disrespect, hidden in passive-aggressive language, because you've outgrown environments that don't match your self-worth, and now you step forward not bitter but clear, not angry but wise. And in that clarity, you build a life where respect is not a reward, it's a requirement. If you're tired of being silenced, overlooked, emotionally drained, and told to just be more patient while your soul is eroding in relationships that don't see you, the Stoic relationship. Blueprint is not just your answer, it's your exit plan. This is the truth society never wanted you to have. This is the kind of power they'd rather keep hidden, because when a man learns how to master his peace, own his presence, and walk away without begging, he becomes unstoppable. This audiobook is your personal guide, packed with timeless Stoic principles that will rewire the way you see women, relationships, and yourself. And now, you can listen to it while walking, jogging, reclaiming your time, anywhere, anytime. Once you have it, it's yours for life. No one can take this wisdom from you. It's linked in the comments. If you're ready to reclaim your peace, comment, "I choose peace," like this video, and subscribe to help other men find the truth and save years of pain, regret, and confusion.